Welcome back to our channel English Avenue. Today, you're not just going to watch a video. You're going to witness the birth of human flight. The moment when two ordinary men with no money, no university degree, and no support did something the world believed was impossible. This is not fiction. This is not fantasy. This is the real story of the Wright brothers, the men who taught the world how to fly. A story about impossible dreams. A story about building wings out of failure. A story about two brothers who changed the world, not because they were lucky, but because they never gave up. You will learn how to think big even when no one believes in you. You will understand how greatness is built through daily effort and pain. And most importantly, while enjoying this powerful story, you will improve your English, because everything is explained in simple, easy words just for you. So grab your headphones. This story might just change your life. Let's begin. Part 1. Before the Wings, the Childhood of Dreamers. Who were the Wright brothers? Let's go back, way back, to the year 1867. That's when Wilbur Wright was born in a small town called Millville, Indiana, United States. 4 years later, in 1871, his younger brother Orville Wright was born in Dayton, Ohio. They were not rich. They were not famous. Their father was a bishop, a religious leader, and their mother was a homemaker with a talent for fixing and building things. Their house was simple. Their life was ordinary. But inside their hearts lived an extraordinary curiosity. One day, when Wilbur was around 11 and Orville was about 7, their father came home from a trip. He brought them a small toy helicopter made of bamboo, cork, and rubber bands. It was based on a design by a famous French inventor. When they twisted the rubber bands and let it go, it flew into the air. The brothers were shocked, amazed. The little toy stayed in the air for a few seconds, and then fell. But something had awakened inside their minds. What if we could make something big that flies like that? They played with it until it broke, and then started building their own versions. The dream of flight was born in their childhood. But it would take decades of pain, effort, and failure to make it real. They didn't go to college. They didn't have any fancy engineering degrees. They were self-learners, curious, passionate, and hungry to build things. They loved books, bicycles, and machines. They read everything they could find about flight, birds, science, and mechanics. Orville started a printing press at age 18. Wilbur helped him. They made their own machines and sold small newspapers. Later, they started a bicycle repair and sales shop. Why is this important? Because they learned how to build and fix things with their hands. They were not dreamers sitting in a room. They were builders, doers, and workers. They would often walk outside and watch birds fly for hours. They studied how birds moved their wings, how they changed direction, and how they stayed in the air. Most people saw birds, but the Wright brothers saw flying machines. Birds fly not because they flap, Wilbur said, but because they control the air. They became obsessed with aerodynamics, the science of how air moves around objects. But remember, this was the late 1800s. No one had built a working flying machine yet. In fact, many scientists said, human flight is impossible. But the Wright brothers didn't listen, because they had something more powerful than facts. They had belief. Around 1892, the brothers opened their Wright Cycle Company in Dayton, Ohio. They fixed and sold bicycles, and used their income to fund their dream of flight. They used their shop like a lab. They built models of wings, tested gliders made from wood and cloth, failed again and again and again. But they kept going. They were not looking for fame. They were chasing a vision that only they could see. They read about Otto Lilienthal, a German engineer who built gliders and sadly died in a crash. They studied every book, sketch, and experiment from people who tried to fly. But the brothers realized something important. Most inventors failed because they couldn't control the machine in the air. So the Wright brothers focused on the problem of balance and control, not just power. They experimented with a new idea: wing warping, twisting the wings to control movement just like a bird. And this idea would one day lead them to change the world. By 1900, they started testing gliders in a windy place called Kitty Hawk in North Carolina. Why there? Because it had strong, steady winds, soft sand for crash landings, and few people. They didn't want the public to laugh if they failed. They packed their tools, left their comfortable shop, and walked into the unknown. They lived in a tent, built their own workshops, and cooked their own food. There were no cameras, no reporters, no awards. Just two brothers, sand on their shoes, grease on their hands, and a sky full of dreams. Every day they carried heavy gliders up hills, tested flights, crashed, rebuilt, tested again. They made more than 700 glider flights before even thinking of adding an engine. That's how much pain, failure, and effort they went through. Silently, patiently, without applause. After all their glider experiments from 1900 to 1902, the Wright brothers had proven one thing clearly. They could make a machine glide through the air and control it. But now came the real challenge. Could they make it fly with a motor? Not just ride the wind, but create their own power? This was no small step. This was a giant leap into the unknown. They needed something the world had never seen before. A lightweight engine. A strong but light propeller system. A way to keep the machine balanced while flying on its own. No one had done this before. No textbook could help. They had to invent everything from scratch. The brothers didn't know much about engines. So what did they do? They read. They studied. They experimented. They tried to buy a lightweight gas engine from manufacturers, but no one had what they needed. Most engines were too heavy, built for cars or machines on the ground. So guess what they did? They built their own engine. With the help of their friend and mechanic, Charlie Taylor, they built a 12-horsepower gasoline engine using aluminum, a rare choice at that time. It was only 180 pounds, 82 kilograms, yet powerful enough to turn two propellers. No one gave them instructions. They just figured it out. Every single part was built by hand. Let that sink in. While designing the plane, they realized something every other inventor got wrong. Most early planes had bad propellers. They were just like boat paddles in pushing air backward. But the Wright brothers said, "A propeller is not a paddle. It's a rotating wing." This was a revolutionary idea. They spent months testing different shapes using math, wind tunnels, and intuition. Eventually, they created curved wooden propellers, each 8.5 feet long, that could cut through air like wings. The design was 95% efficient, more efficient than many modern propellers today. That's how far ahead they were. The final machine they built was called the Wright Flyer 1903. Let's break it down. Wingspan, 40 feet. Weight, 605 pounds. Engine, 12 horsepower. Structure, spruce wood, fabric, wires. Controls, wing warping plus rear rudder. Power, twin propellers. Pilot position, lying flat on stomach to reduce wind resistance. It looked strange. More like a flying bed with wings than a modern airplane. But it was ready. They built it. They tested it. Now it was time to fly it. In December 1903, Wilbur and Orville returned to Kitty Hawk with their machine. The weather was freezing. The winds were strong. But the time had come. They set up the flyer on wooden tracks to help it move forward without wheels. They used a launch rail system since they didn't have runways. The plane had no cockpit, no seat belts, no protection. It was just raw wood, cloth, gasoline, and guts. First attempts. On December 14th, they tried to fly for the first time. Wilbur was the pilot. But during takeoff, the machine lifted too quickly, stalled, and crashed. They repaired the damage, adjusted the controls, and tried again. No crying, no complaining, no giving up. On the morning of December 17th, the wind was strong, about 27 miles per hour. Orville and Wilbur flipped a coin. Orville won. He would be the first. At 10:35 a.m., with only 5 local witnesses watching, Orville Wright lay flat on the flyer. The engine roared to life. The plane shook. And then it lifted. Not far, not high. But it was the first time in human history a powered machine with a pilot lifted off the ground, stayed in the air, and landed safely. Flight time, 12 seconds. Distance, 120 feet. History made. They made 3 more flights that day. The longest was 59 seconds, flying 852 feet. It was cold. The machine was basic, but they had defeated gravity. No celebration, no parade. Just a photo. And a letter to their father. One of the witnesses, John T. Daniels, took a photograph of that first flight. That photo, with Orville in the air and Wilbur running beside, would become one of the most famous images in history. 2 brothers, 1 dream. And the sky was no longer the limit. Part 2. The world doesn't believe you until you win. You would think the whole world would celebrate, right? The invention of the airplane. Humanity's first flight. But no. The news of their flight was met with silence, doubt, and mockery. Many major newspapers, even the New York Times, either ignored the event or refused to publish it. Why? Because the idea of human flight still sounded like a joke to many people. They said things like, if it was real, the government would be involved. We didn't see it, so it didn't happen. 2 bicycle mechanics cannot fly before trained scientists. The Wright brothers were rejected, dismissed, and insulted. But they didn't get angry. They didn't scream. They just said one thing in their hearts. We'll fly again, and again, until the whole world sees it with their own eyes. After the success of 1903, they returned home to Dayton, Ohio. But they didn't celebrate. They went right back to the workshop. They knew the first flight was just the beginning. The plane flew only 120 feet. That's good, but not enough to convince the world. So they decided to build a new airplane, one that could stay in the air longer, fly in circles, carry passengers, and fly in front of people to prove the truth. This new model would be called the Flyer 2 and then later Flyer 3. They improved. The engine power, the wing shape, the steering system, the stability in the air. Their small shop became a laboratory of the future of flight. You might wonder, why didn't they show the world immediately? Because they were smart. They knew if they showed everything too early, others might copy their design and steal the invention. So, from 1904 to 1905, they continued testing flights in private fields near Dayton, flying in secret. But even in these hidden places, they made giant progress. By 1905, their Flyer 3 could fly 24 miles, stay in the air for 38 minutes, make controlled turns and circles. They had now built the first real airplane, a machine that could stay in the air, land safely, and be flown again. They had done it. But still, no one believed them. Can you imagine? You invent the impossible. You do it again and again. But no one is watching. No one is listening. And no one cares. In the early 1900s, other inventors started claiming they had made planes too. But most were failures. Unbalanced machines that crashed after short hops. One name stood out: Samuel Langley, a respected scientist with government funding. He had a huge team. He built a flying machine using boats and steam engines. But every time he launched it, it crashed. Meanwhile, the Wright brothers, with no funding, no fame, and no support, were flying successfully and safely. Finally, people started asking, who are these bicycle mechanics from Ohio? The Wright brothers were not just inventors, they were businessmen. They wanted to sell their invention to the U.S. Army, European governments, private investors. But everyone said the same thing. Show us your machine flying. The brothers replied, we'll only show it after you sign a contract. Our design is secret. This back and forth lasted for years. No one wanted to sign first. Everyone was afraid of being fooled. So the Wrights stayed stuck, flying in private, waiting for someone brave enough to believe. During this time, many people around the world tried to steal the credit. A Brazilian inventor named Alberto Santos Dumont made public flights in Paris in 1906, years after the Wright brothers. And the media celebrated him like the true inventor. Why? Because he flew in front of people. That's all it took. But the Wright brothers were being smart, cautious, and protective. And because of that, they were being forgotten. Imagine watching someone else being called the father of flight, while you sit at home, holding the real invention. It's painful, it's unfair. But again, they stayed silent. They just kept preparing. In 1907, a French military group reached out. They were interested in the Wright airplane. The brothers saw a chance, finally, to prove themselves. So in 1908, the Wright brothers made a huge decision. Wilbur would go to France to give public demonstrations. Orville would stay in the U.S. and do the same for the American military. It was time to prove the world wrong. Live in front of everyone. But this time, they were not just testing. They were risking their lives to defend their truth. In May 1908, Wilbur Wright landed in France with a mission: to show Europe that the Wright brothers had already conquered the skies. But when he arrived, there was no excitement. The press was doubtful. Inventors in France believed their own designs were better. Many thought Wilbur was a liar. They said things like, "This American says he can fly? Let him prove it." Some newspapers even joked about his clothes, saying, "He dresses like a farmer. What could he possibly know about flying?" Wilbur didn't argue. He didn't explain. He just went to work. The airplane had been shipped in boxes from America. Some parts were damaged, others were missing, tools were delayed. So Wilbur had to rebuild the flyer himself in a workshop, piece by piece. Imagine this. You're alone, in a foreign country, surrounded by people who think you're lying. And you have to prove the future. From a pile of wood, wires, and canvas, he worked silently, patiently, with the same care that had carried him from a bicycle shop to the edge of history. On August 8, 1908, the world watched. Hundreds of people gathered, reporters, scientists, soldiers. Everyone was waiting to laugh, not to cheer. But when Wilbur started the engine, ran down the rail and lifted into the air, the laughter stopped. He didn't just fly. He turned, he circled, he flew smoothly like a bird, then came down perfectly. The crowd stood silent, frozen in shock. Then someone clapped, then another. Then the entire field erupted in cheers. The press went crazy the next day. The Wrights are not bluffers. They are conquerors of the sky. Overnight, Wilbur became a star in Europe. And finally, the world started to believe. Suddenly, the same people who doubted him now wanted to interview him, photograph him, offer him deals. Kings and scientists visited the field. Inventors watched and took notes. Spectators cried watching him fly in circles. Wilbur made dozens of flights, showing that the Wright flyer could fly long distances, make tight turns, stay perfectly controlled. He didn't just show a machine. He showed that human flight was real, repeatable, and reliable. While Wilbur was flying in France, Orville was in the U.S., preparing to show the airplane to the U.S. Army at Fort Myer, Virginia. The military had finally agreed to a test, but only if the Wrights could prove the plane could carry 2 people. Fly for 1 hour, be safe and repeatable. Orville was ready. He modified the flyer to include a passenger seat and improved the controls. In September 1908, Orville began the demonstrations. Just like Wilbur in France, Orville stunned the American crowds. He flew over trees. He stayed in the air for 62 minutes. He carried Army officers as passengers. He made perfect landings. Crowds cheered. Reporters wrote headlines like, "America finally flies." People who had laughed before now watched with tears in their eyes. But then, something happened that almost ended everything. On one demonstration flight, Orville took up a passenger named Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, a young U.S. Army officer. During the flight, one of the propellers cracked. The plane began to shake violently. The machine plunged to the ground from 75 feet high. The crowd screamed. The flyer hit hard. Orville was badly injured. His hip, ribs, and leg were broken. But Lieutenant Selfridge died, becoming the first person to die in a powered airplane crash. For weeks, Orville lay in a hospital bed, barely able to move. Newspapers that had once praised the Wrights now asked, "Is flying too dangerous? Was this just a mistake?" The Wright brothers were devastated. They had fought so hard to prove their invention, and now people were afraid of it. But Wilbur didn't stop. He continued flying in Europe, with even more passengers, more crowds, and more respect. And soon, the Wright brothers became the biggest name in aviation, all over the world. By 1909, everything changed. The U.S. Army signed a contract to buy their airplane. France, Germany, Italy, and England all offered deals. They began training pilots, building new planes, and opening aviation schools. They were now inventors, entrepreneurs, teachers of flight, and finally, recognized heroes. They started the Wright Company, hired workers, built airplanes, and helped train the first generation of pilots. In 1909, Orville and Wilbur were invited to Washington, D.C. Thousands of people came to celebrate them. Even the President of the United States attended. Parades were held, medals were awarded. People called them the men who gave wings to the world. From being ignored and laughed at, to being respected by kings, presidents, and armies. All this fame, all this pressure, all this nonstop work. It started to take a toll. Wilbur, always quiet and serious, began working day and night. He traveled constantly. He wrote contracts. He fought legal battles against fake inventors who tried to steal credit. He was not just a pilot now. He was a businessman, lawyer, and defender of their legacy. And in the middle of all this, something tragic was about to happen. Part 3. The Price of Flight. Fame, burnout, and the final battle. By 1909, the Wright brothers were not just inventors. They were industry leaders. They started the Wright Company to build and sell airplanes. The company had factories. They hired pilots to demonstrate and promote. They began teaching aviation to others. And they became very wealthy. They were now living what most people would call success. But for Wilbur Wright, success didn't mean rest. Wilbur wasn't interested in becoming a rich businessman. He cared deeply about protecting their invention. Many inventors across Europe and America had started building airplanes using ideas the Wright brothers had created, without credit. So Wilbur took it upon himself to fight back. He spent years in courtrooms, writing documents, explaining patents, and battling copycats who tried to steal their ideas. He wasn't flying. He wasn't building. He was defending. He was now trapped in the world of lawyers, judges, and endless paperwork. And it was slowly killing his spirit. The Wright brothers had received a patent in 1906 for their wing warping control system, the most important part of airplane control. But now, other companies, including Glenn Curtiss, a major rival, were building planes with similar systems, claiming they were different. The Wright brothers said, "That's theft." But the courts moved slowly. The patent war between the Wrights and Curtiss became one of the most bitter legal battles in aviation history. It lasted years, cost millions, and slowed down innovation because no one wanted to build planes during the lawsuit. Wilbur believed he was protecting truth. Others said he was blocking progress. Either way, the stress consumed him. From 1909 to 1912, Wilbur worked nonstop, defending patents, traveling between Europe and America, running the Wright Company, meeting kings, military leaders, and politicians, and never taking rest. He was still the quiet, serious thinker from Dayton. But now, with the weight of the entire aviation world on his shoulders. And then, suddenly, came the moment no one expected. In early 1912, after a trip to Boston, Wilbur fell ill. At first, it seemed like a regular cold or exhaustion, but it quickly worsened. He was diagnosed with typhoid fever, a deadly bacterial infection spread through contaminated food or water. He became weaker each day. His mind, once sharp like a blade, became foggy. His body, once strong from lifting gliders, could no longer move. Orville and his sister Catherine stayed by his side, praying, but nothing helped. Wilbur Wright died at the age of just 45. The man who gave wings to the world was now gone. The loss was devastating. Orville was crushed. Catherine wept. The world mourned. The New York Times wrote, A great soul has passed. He gave man the power of flight and took no joy in glory. Wilbur didn't live to see the rise of commercial aviation, the airplane's use in world wars, or even the age of global travel he made possible. But his legacy had already taken off. After Wilbur's death, Orville took over the Wright Company. But he was never the same. He didn't enjoy the business. He didn't want to fight in court anymore. He missed his brother deeply. In 1915, he sold his shares of the company and stepped away. But Orville continued to experiment privately with airplanes, serve on aviation advisory boards, promote aviation safety and innovation, and preserve the Wright legacy. He lived for decades after Wilbur, but he never stopped saying, "The Wrights were two, not one." World War I. Soon after Wilbur's death, the world saw something that would have broken his heart. Airplanes were used in war. In World War I, 1914 to 1918, planes dropped bombs, spied on enemies, and engaged in deadly dogfights. The machine created to lift humanity was now being used to destroy it. Orville once said, "I wish we could have invented something more useful than the airplane." Even though they had changed the world, they hadn't imagined this kind of future. As time passed, the Wright brothers became global legends. Airports were named after them. Their plane, the 1903 Wright Flyer, was placed in the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. Stamps, medals, books, and museums celebrated their name. In 1939, on the 36th anniversary of the first flight, President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared National Aviation Day in honor of Orville's birthday. Orville lived long enough to see the rise of jet engines, the invention of helicopters, and even the breaking of the sound barrier in 1947, 4 years after his death. On January 30th, 1948, Orville Wright died at age 76 from a heart attack. He had lived long enough to witness 2 world wars and decades of transformation in aviation. Part 4. The Sky Belongs to Dreamers. The Eternal Legacy of the Wright Brothers. After Orville's death in 1948, the world paused to reflect on what these 2 men had given us. Let's be clear. They didn't just invent the airplane. They invented a new world. Because of their courage, persistence, and belief, the following became possible. The age of aviation. Planes now fly millions of people every day. You can travel across the globe in hours, not months. You can eat breakfast in New York and dinner in Paris, all because of their invention. Space exploration. The first rocket. The first man in space. The moon landing in 1969. None of this would have been possible without the first flight in 1903. Helicopters, jets, and drones. Modern flying machines of all kinds came from the basic principles the Wrights developed. Global unity. Families connect across continents. Cultures meet and share. Emergencies receive help faster. The airplane changed how humanity lives, connects, and survives. And it all began with 2 brothers in a bicycle shop in a small town with a dream the world laughed at. The iconic photo from December 17, 1903, Orville flying, Wilbur running beside him, is now one of the most shared images in history. It's more than a photograph. It's a symbol of human courage, believing in the impossible, building with your own hands, and never, ever giving up. Even though they succeeded, there's something heartbreaking about their story. Wilbur never got to see global air travel, Witness commercial airplanes. Watch the world rise into the clouds. He died too soon, in 1912, at just 45 years old, after spending his final years fighting to protect the invention, instead of enjoying it. And Orville, though he lived longer, often lived in bitterness and loneliness. He watched people forget Wilbur, watched companies use their designs without thanks, and sometimes questioned if it was all worth it. They never had families. They never got married. They never retired to relax. They gave everything, their youth, health, and peace, to give us flight. This is why their story is not just inspiring. It's also tragic. They made the world fly, but they carried the weight of the sky. Alone. Let's pause here. Let's breathe. And let's remember what this story truly teaches us. Because you are not just watching a biography. You're learning about what it means to dream. 1. You don't need permission to start. The Wright brothers didn't wait for funding, degrees, or approval. They just started, with whatever they had. Start with your small workshop. Start with your hands. Start with your heart. 2. Failure is a part of the blueprint. They failed hundreds of times, crashed again and again, but each crash taught them something new. Don't fear failure. Fear not learning from it. 3. Stay silent. Let your work speak. They were rejected, mocked, and ignored, but they never shouted. They just kept working. Real power is quiet. 4. Believe when no one else does. Even their own country laughed at them, but they kept believing. If your belief is strong enough, you don't need anyone else to believe first. 5. Protect what you build. But don't let it destroy you. Wilbur spent his final years fighting to defend their invention. It consumed him. Protect your vision, but don't lose your peace in the process. Every time a plane takes off, a child dreams of becoming a pilot. A traveler crosses oceans in hours. A rocket touches the edge of space. A part of the Wright brothers' dream is still alive. Their names live on. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Wright State University. Dayton International Airport. National Aviation Day on Orville's birthday, August 19th. Even NASA honors their legacy, naming equipment, spacecraft, and test centers after them. The entire world owes them a debt we can never fully repay. If Wilbur and Orville could speak to you today, they wouldn't ask for applause. They wouldn't want statues. They would simply say, if you have a dream, build it. Even if the world doesn't believe you. Even if they call you foolish. Even if they never thank you. Because one day, they'll fly because of you. This was the true story of the Wright brothers. Not a story of two scientists, but a story of two sons, two dreamers, two builders, who changed the sky and gave flight to every future generation. If this story touched your heart, if you felt inspired, if you learned something powerful today, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We tell the stories that give you wings. Also remember, this story improved your English because while learning about history, you also learned new words, expressions, and real storytelling. That's the magic of this channel. And that's the magic of people who never give up. Thank you for watching till the end. Thank you for honoring the Wright brothers with us. Now go out and fly toward your dream.